The Bizarre Cast contains adult themes and explicit content. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a long-awaited episode of the Bizarre Cast. It has not been cancelled; it has been resurrected, and I bring you today a lovely, I'm sure it will be a lovely interview with a fine artist and painter based in Ireland who goes by the name Billy Dante. Billy, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me, Richard. Delighted to be here to chat with you.
Very good. Superb. Billy, full disclosure to the audience here, we do know each other a long time. I think it's over 25 years, and it's a long-awaited chat, not for the audience because they've been without an episode for nearly 6 months, but also I got in contact with you quite some time ago, and we've only now made the time, so very glad to have you on today, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day.
Yeah, I think we had a small bit of a pandemic that interrupted things.
For sure. I think it was nearly possibly going to be an in-person interview at some stage, but it just didn't pan out. But for those listening now, they're wondering, who's this guy, Billy Dante? Would you like to give a little bit of background and flavor about what you're all about?
For sure. So I am, as Richard mentioned, a fine artist, a painter from Cork in Ireland. I'm now based in Dublin, working out of Mart Studios, and I've been developing my practice for the last 5 years since graduating from the Crawford College of Art and Design in Cork, graduating in fine art, and predominantly kind of painting is my first medium. But I guess through painting, the output has not always been your traditional oil on canvas. I have let it flow into other works that have been more live action, performative pieces, abstract sound, poems. I'm sure we'll get into all the detail here today, and I'd love to show some work for anyone who's interested. You can kind of find my work on Instagram and through my website, billydante.com.
Super. Usually we leave the plugs till the end, but we let them slide at the start.
Yeah.
So, Billy, it's far from fine art that you were reared. You're always one for the doodles. I'll be them the best of the whole class. We used to go to school together, audience. You always had a flair for the artistic side, but when did things start to cement themselves that you wanted to maybe throw yourself a bit more seriously behind the art?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it doesn't have a straightforward answer. As far as I've delved into it, there isn't an artistic bone in my parents' body, and they would happily agree with that themselves. They don't have any interest in art, certainly didn't have an interest in art before I arrived, and it's always been there for me. I don't really know where it came from. Certainly once the spark was identified, my parents encouraged it, and I guess it was always an easy way to keep me quiet with the pen and paper, and they always have supported my artwork. But where it began, I don't really know. There definitely was that seed from day one. I can just always remember being fascinated with the visual, with the world, and observing the world, and trying to capture that through drawing or through painting, not for to get plaudits at how well I can do that. It was just like muscle memory. It just helped me to understand things. Whatever you were into as a child, I tended to want to draw that. So be it watching a football game, I'd want to draw the footballers, or be it the most popular song at the time, the video that's released for that, why not draw and try and capture that, or try and understand it in this visual sense. I was kind of thinking about this last night in preparation for the talk, for our talk here, and I was trying to think about the earliest works that I can remember doing, and it goes back to, was it 1998? I can remember when Titanic was released, and that was, a big moment in cinematic history. And I was too young to even go and watch Titanic, but suddenly all the talk was about this 3 hour long film that you had an interval in the middle of. And I can remember making a picture book of the Titanic, quite morbid as a very young child. I guess it was probably maybe 6 or 7. A picture book of the sinking of the Titanic, and maybe it was true actually not being able to go and see the film yet, and this was me in my own mind imagining what the big iconic scenes are in the movie, but kind of putting that down on paper for some reason. I had to do it. And when we think back to knowing each other for 25 years, I guess the first time it was identified in school again was very, very early, maybe the second class that we were in. I can remember the teacher, Miss Tyrrell, who was quite into drawing, kind of encouraging me. Obviously saw that I would copy the illustrations that we'd have in our textbooks. So we're talking now about being the age of 6 or 7, so maybe copying the illustrations and being able to kind of accurately copy what I'm seeing in the book on my own kind of little sketchbooks.
Yeah, no tracing involved.
No tracing involved. No, I always had quite a good eye for just being able to reproduce without the tracing. And I don't remember there being a huge encouragement, but that does just stand out as somebody who kind of identified, okay, there's a natural flair here for drawing. I think, I'm not sure if you can remember, but she was quite good at drawing little caricatures and stuff on the
board. Yeah,
blackboard.
no, I remember actually. I think my mom had recently like unearthed, God, they must be like 25-year-old copybooks where I had actually tried to do the drawings and they were just rubbish,
Yeah.
like compared to, because my earliest Billy Dante artistic flair was when we were, yeah, it must have been 6 or 7. The Red Bull ads that were illustrated had just started coming out, and you were basically, between yourself and Brian, were doing alternating like comic strips of potential Red Bull ads. And I remember, because I was trying them as well, but they were rubbish, that we'd be like submitting them to Red Bull for the next ad that they do. I
Yeah, I
distinctly
love.
remember one about Christmas.
Yeah, I love that they haven't changed the style of the Red Bull ads. They really, they stick out now more than they maybe even did at the time then. They're keeping that real kind of tactile feel that it still looks like it's almost hand drawn
And
watercolor on
scribbled a
paper.
bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Red Bull ads, because I was thinking about, I think we had an Irish textbook that had very similar illustrations to the Red Bull ad, kind of
They did, with the big nose on the front, yeah.
with the big nose. And I remember like one particular drawing where I think there was one of the characters, one of the figures was swinging, maybe kind of jolting their head right to left. So there was a motion in the drawing, and that is the only one that really sticks out in my head. I can remember doing that and being able to do it, and it had that same motion. And it was purely just for my own kind of kicks. I've always just loved drawing and what I could bring in terms of my own kind of trying to understand the world, and connecting with people too, like that, making comic strips and seeing people get a bit of entertainment from it. That's always been a nice bonus. So that's kind of where it started, and from there it's kept trundling forward, and it completely bamboozles my parents that they are both from finance backgrounds, not at all into art, as I said. Same with my siblings, but it's been there, and it's undeniably been there from the start. So through that, I guess, to your question of like when did I start to think about taking it more seriously, would have been when we were getting to the latter stages of school, thinking about what courses we were going to try and go for in college. my immediate thoughts were, let's go to art college. That seems like the best 4 years I could have. Just creating art, being in a space with other artists. Like growing up, I didn't really meet too many others who had such an interest in fine art and painting. Studying art as a subject in school, there was others who were very interested, but possibly not, not that I saw to the same extent. So I really wanted to get into a college where I was surrounded by others who were, completely dedicated to art.
So at that stage, then, like, you obviously enjoyed it for just the art itself, but
Hmm.
was there a sort of a parallel interest in the history of art at that stage, or was that more like you were looking to do that in college more so to learn?
No, for me, there was a parallel interest in art history and artists, and I guess like that is a really good point. There was a lot of people who were into drawing and were into making work, but weren't so interested in the art history side. And as much as I got a kick off making work, I got a huge kick off going to galleries, going to museums, and seeing work. So a lot of people, like at that time, us all being kids creating work, the excitement was in the making and making something that looked really cool. And often for our age group, cool wasn't seen by others in museums and galleries, going down to the Crawford Art Gallery. But for me, I absolutely loved it. I loved seeing paintings in the flesh. I guess at that time, in like the street art and graffiti was just as it is today. Like it was the most, probably the most popular kind of form of art that just grabs the masses. I wasn't so interested in that. I was actually interested in the whole thread of like art history. That's why it's more in the realm of fine art. I was just as interested in learning about the artists of the past as I was about developing my own work or anything that was happening outside in the streets.
And do you think there was a certainly maybe at the back of your mind that you one day wanted to be looked back as one of those greats, or is it ever just about the creative process? Like, or is there a bit of both?
I would say a bit of both. Yeah, definitely. I think as someone wanting to be an artist, that's where you want to measure yourself up against everything that's gone before. And I like to think that there's not, it's never just one artist that's kind of carries the torch on from the past. But as an artist, you do need to, I think, feel the weight of art history behind you and feel that you are part of the next step forward. And in order to take that step forward, as much as you can, you need to be looking back and kind of go through the the different art movements, the different artists that have grabbed your attention and have interested you. You need to find out kind of why. And I don't think you ever maybe come to a definitive answer. It can just be something that's a feeling. But I think it's very, very important. And even when we got to art college, I think it was, I still didn't see it there for a lot of the students that it actually just ability to want to look back and study art. I think it's the only way you can really make, as artists going forward, you want to create something, and not in any way a gimmicky sense. You want to create something that hasn't been created before, because you want to evolve, or be part of the evolution of art. And so much today is gimmick and trying to shock, and that's been happening for decades now. But I do believe you want to try, like I go into the studio and I want to try and make a painting that I haven't seen before. That's still, you can look back and see references to different, not particular works, but maybe movements and styles of applying paint, or styles of drawing and crafting an image. But you want there to be an element of something new, and that can only happen through understanding to the best of your ability everything that's gone before.
Yeah, 100%. Because for those who are wondering, because this is obviously an audio medium, so they can't see the art in front of them. So I would encourage you to maybe get up at Billy Dante on Instagram while you're listening, just get a sense and flavor. And as I am also doing that,
Yeah.
my interpretation of maybe your style, and correct me if I'm wrong, because
Mm-hmm.
you might have your own opinions, but all art is subjective. You kind of find beauty almost in the unkept and the mundane. Like, you just take a scene, it could just be side of a road, an ashtray, beer can, anything like that, and you paint it, but it actually comes across as very melancholic but also humorous. Is that sort of the intention, or do you have a different way you would say that you express your art?
I'm absolutely delighted with that analysis, Richard. I'm loving that you touched on the mundane. I do gravitate towards the mundane in the work, because I think through painting and art you can take the mundane, and I guess the works that you're referencing there would be the most recent series that I'm working on, which is called Butts and Cracks. Um, so there's a humor there even in the title as well.
Of
Uh,
course,
and,
yes.
and it's looking at the butts and cracks in our pavements. So I like to see it as the kind of landscape that we're always gazing upon but never actually looking at.
Yep.
And mundane, yes, because when you see them, you recognize those spaces. You're
You've seen it a
forever,
thousand times, kind of thing.
you've seen it a thousand times, but actually stopping and through observation of the mundane, which I think is what I do, and then putting that back on the viewer, that observation is kind of passed off to the viewer. I think it maybe sheds a new light, hopefully, on the world, or gives a new kind of perspective, bringing that space that we're always looking straight down upon but never focused on, suddenly bringing it upright, kind of confronting a viewer on a wall. I think hopefully makes one kind of think about taking those moments, and maybe stopping and observing the world around them. And even in bottle caps smashed into the ground, there can be beautiful colors, there can be incredible texture, there can be humor. It can kind of be everything, and it's nothing all at the same time. And for me, they're the spaces that I walk around. So I'd often take a walk on my lunchtime or in the evening, and I would take photos as I'm walking around. And again,
Yep.
I'm not carefully composing the photos in any way. I can just be snapping. And when I get back to the studio, then these are the kind of reference images to create the work, and the work becomes something different then. But so they have a personal connection to me. But I think there's also like a universal quality to the mundane. I think anyone could look at them and kind of appreciate, as you said, that these are the kind of space we all recognize, but they show up kind of beautiful colors even in, I think I've got some paintings there of, like, it's challenging maybe what is traditionally thought of as ugly, tarmac roads, concrete pavements. But if you stop and really start to observe a tarmac road, you start to see maybe the delicate lines that carve between the little pebbles. And, in
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
ways you could see them as kind of delicate, abstract drawings, mark making, or even, you think of that as like a flat black surface, but there's often a shine to it, and it's reflecting the sun that's shining down on it, and maybe gives off a beautiful kind of purpley blue, or you can actually kind of see any color in it. It's like a black mirror almost. So yeah, I guess it's trying to look at the really boring, and through painting then maybe throw it back on the viewer that this is a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, because just to bring it back a little bit, like my first introduction to Billy Dante as the core concept and as an out and out artist, the work was a little bit more sexual orientated.
Yeah.
And I think for maybe just even the age that we would have been at, because we're similar
Mm,
ages, I think me as the viewer and the observer maybe wasn't ready to appreciate it at the time. But just to touch back on, you were saying, some people might do it for the shock or whatever.
hmm
At the time, was that more for just the type of expression you were going for at the time, or was there an element of shock to it too?
Yeah, I'd like to think it was less about the element of shock, but looking back now, I can probably see that that was there unconsciously. It was a lot of the work that I was doing towards the end of my fine art degree, and the work was very big, very bold in color, and very explicit in the content. And I guess a lot of that was influenced by the art I was looking at of that time. I was looking at a lot of artists that were dealing with kind of mythical tales. I guess that's actually how I started to be nicknamed Dante. I was creating work that wasn't directly derived, but certainly was influenced by reading Dante's The Divine Comedy and focusing particularly on the Inferno. So I guess that's where a lot of the content and the kind of no rules to content came from. Um,
Sure.
and that's how it formed into uh, Billy Dante. So my legal name and the name on my birth cert being Kevin O'Sullivan. Around the time that I was graduating, I was creating this work from having read Dante's Inferno and the, I mean, the darkness of that work. So a nickname was going around at the time, Dante, and then my middle name is William Billy. So I put them two together, and maybe that was partly because of the type of work it was. I wanted to take kind of full responsibility for that myself, um, because if you can imagine, my parents were pretty shocked by that work too, and I really didn't want it to be shocking, but you do want the work to be challenging.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's good. Art should sort of challenge you to at
Yeah,
least see things a bit differently.
but I think actually thinking back on the work, I have this idea of like realness, and when I look back on that work, I still enjoy it. There's a realness that is lacking in it, and I don't mean realness as in like photorealism, because there's certainly not that. It's more, and all my painting is more expressive painting. It's never realism, but a realness in terms of like an
They're a little bit
authenticity.
forced more so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And now I actually think the work I'm doing, it's taken me a long time to get to the kind of Butts and Cracks series now, and in some ways that can be more impactful. It's more true to myself, I think, when I'm making it, and that definitely translates when someone's viewing it.
Well, they come across a lot more rich, we'll say, like a lot more care was put into it, more so
Mhm.
would be the way I would pick that up. Like there's a lot
Yeah,
more detail, even though
yeah,
it's actually something that's, for example, yeah, Butts and Cracks, beauty in the banal, curb your enthusiasm, where it's just a great, and from far away, like at arm's length, it looks like a picture.
hmm
But when you zoom in, it's like, oh yeah, it's actually just blotches of paint. So that sort of aspect compared to the earlier stuff, which I would have seen years and years ago, that was a lot more like, it kind of felt like rushed and raw, but
yeah,
you're saying maybe not real. Would that be fair?
yeah. I think I was asking big questions at a very early stage, and so my lack of experiences would have prevented that work, I think, from being as real as I would have liked it to be. I was dealing with trying to work through the big questions of life, death, and the sex in between. And I think the work now still, in a far subtler way, can touch on the basics of our existence. Whereas in those early works, and it's funny talking about the style of them, a lot of that as well is shaped by what I was reading, what I was trying to achieve, but it's also just shaped by the technical side of, they were very big pieces of work. Now I'm working on that,
Sure.
so the
Yeah.
style, the scale impacts what you're doing. So there was a lot of energy in them still, which, like, there's
Yeah,
elements of those
100% you
paintings
can
that
see
I'm
it.
very
Yeah.
proud of, like the energy, because it was just a physical undertaking to actually cover I think some of them were maybe 6 foot tall, maybe 4 foot wide.
So it was really like a vigorous sex session in and of itself, trying to get it spread all over.
Yeah, I mean, there's a realness there in trying to grapple with those things as a young man as well. But the subtler now that I see in the work is,
You're calmed down, you have a long-term partner, things are a bit more regular. You don't
could
you
be,
don't need to be putting it on the canvas.
yeah, there was the madness of art college in those paintings. But yeah, I look back on them with fond memories now. It's funny to look back on them.
That's good. No, that's great. And we didn't really touch on, in terms of your initial style and even just using the brush, what were your biggest artistic inspirations? Because I know you're mentioning you're reading Dante, but what were some of the wider inspirations that you had?
Well, in terms of like art movements, I kind of go through. There's some artists that I'm always returning to, but I do go through different phases of loving different art movements. Like at the moment, I'm very interested in the London painters around the time of, let's say, the London School, around like the 1950s. David Hockney, Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud. At the time when I was creating the works towards the end of college, you can see references there to the big new figurative painting from like the 1980s in New York. So coming out of the Warhol era and him passing off to Jean-Michel Basquiat and Francisco Clemente, and in particular, yeah, Francisco Clemente and Julian Schnabel, who's now making a lot of good films, along with his painting. But I guess that was kind of influencing my scale, was influenced by Schnabel, and then some of the imagery and the way I was tackling the figure was probably at that stage being influenced by Clemente. Now you can see references to more what would be thought of as kind of traditional figurative painters like Freud, Bacon. Like this, I don't think any work can be directly brought back to one painter, but there's, like, when we think of the different elements that make up a painting, so the drawing style could be taken from somebody who is a very traditional craftsman like Lucian Freud in terms of the underlying drawing. In terms of like paint application, then you could be referencing another artist. I love the, the thickness and the texture of the paint that somebody like Frank Auerbach, and that just is achieved through building up layer upon layer upon layer to get this surface that isn't your flat,
Yeah.
like a 2D. It makes the kind of painting. I like the idea of painting as objects.
Do you have a certain type of like paint that you use? Is it like oil on like acrylics or?
So it'd be all oil paint is primarily kind of what I use. Under paintings, I would often, just to get something quickly down on the canvas and have it dry quickly, I might do an initial layer of acrylic. So when I stretch up the canvas, the priming process takes quite a while. So you get to a stage then when you invested quite a bit of time into the canvas, and suddenly the white is staring back at you, and you're looking at the blank canvas hesitant. So I try and drive on and dive in as quickly as possible with big thick sticks of charcoal to do an underdrawing. And if I still feel that the white blank canvas is staring back at me too much, I will get going with it with a layer of acrylic, and let that dry. And just I try never to feel kind of intimidated by the canvas. I'm quite confident that there's no layer that can't be painted over, that can't be redone when you're dealing with acrylic and oil. For quick sketches, I will do watercolor on paper, let's say if I'm just working out a composition.
Yeah.
And I've found, for anyone who's used watercolor, it's very unforgiving. The great thing about acrylic and oil is you just play the patient game, wait for it to dry, and you can always layer on top. And I kind of like that, actually, like having layers underneath that are paintings that have been thrown away, because as I was saying, it kind of builds up a
Like,
skin and a
almost
texture.
the hidden history of the painting is actually in the painting.
Yeah, I don't think that there's no energy lost in a painting for me. I don't believe in this idea that, oh, I had it 2 hours ago and I've just gone too far. Well, just keep going further and you'll get it back. But with watercolor, you can go to that point where I've gone too far, and I actually do need to scrap it, because with watercolor you're working from lights to dark. So if you go too early with the darks, there's no light color that can go on top of a dark watercolor.
Yeah, I've recently used watercolors, and they are quite unforgiving. We've did a little Van Gogh sunflower at a sort of it's one of these like wine and
Oh
paint or
yes, yeah.
something. And we did some koalas as well. And since it all has to be dry within the hour, it's like boom, boom, boom. It's very tough.
Yeah, I do have an appreciation for those that have mastered watercolor. Like they have um, Turner watercolors in Dublin, and I think it was specified when the works were being donated to the National Gallery of Ireland that they could only be shown in springtime.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's partly to do with the delicacy of the work. So I also think it's maybe to do with the work and showing them
In the certain
at the
light and
turn
stuff.
exactly the particular light. But my God, we see his kind of mastery of watercolor. It's like his oil paintings are incredible, but his studies in preparation for those oil paintings in watercolor are just phenomenal.
And then I suppose in terms of your own output,
Hmm.
because looking at some of the photos of you in studio, there seems to be a large body of works all the time.
Hmm.
What sort of would be the output for yourself?
Yeah, I probably think of myself as quite prolific in terms of output. There's a lot of paintings that are made, not a lot that have been shown recently, and that kind of irks me a little bit. I wanna start getting a little bit braver in terms of taking them outside the studio and showing them. I work quite quickly, and that's something that I try to get across in even like the paint handling, that there's a kind of an energy to it. I don't want the works to kind of feel um, in any way stagnant. So I do work quite quickly, and I'll often let works dry and move on to another painting, and then 6 months down the road I could come back to one that was thought of as finished. So while they're in the studio, and they can be, for all intents and purposes, in my head thought of as finished, but while they're in that studio, there's always a potential for them to be looked at differently someday, and I'll have to get out and kind of reactivate them through kind of getting started on maybe another layer. But I do churn out quite a lot of paintings every year. I would say I'm making a painting a week on average.
Okay. And yeah, that would be like my next question, because you were saying just to be a little bit more brave of showing them off. Is it a case that you're hoarding all your works, or are you looking to sell any, or what is the ultimate fate of the works of Billy Dante right now?
For me, the goal would be to have a solo exhibition. I'm very often working in series. I think of them as works that should be shown together and experienced as a whole. Of course, in showing them, the works would then be up for sale. But I guess through Instagram, it's a funny thing that sometimes before any of the works have even gone on show in a gallery, somebody can be reaching out and wanting to purchase, which is fantastic. But for me, there's always a part where I've had a show in mind. I can go back to the person and say, look, I can happily tell you that this work will be yours, but I want to show it first. I think there is something about completing the work through showing it and having that experience of a series all together. So that's my ultimate fate would be, for them to live in galleries, and then beyond that, they can be purchased and happily hung in houses. But for me, it's more allowing people to experience the work, and for me to get their feedback on it. What did it make them think or feel before it was, oh, I just want to have that painting and put it in my house.
Yeah, of course. And it's kind of I wanted to sort of make a point today, having been on a little bit of a hiatus for different reasons with the podcast, to come back with such a prolific painter such as yourself doing one painting a week. So for the likes of me, who pretty much got like creative block, for you then to keep at the canvas and keep at your work, like what keeps you coming back? Is it just a primal lizard brain want to paint, or do you ever find yourself struggling in front of the canvas?
Yes, is the answer. There's definitely a struggle there with, in terms, for me, the struggle is maybe getting the time to be in the studio, carving out that time to get into the studio every day. Once I'm there, I find I'll be able to work on something. I'll be, either get out a sheet of paper and just start drawing something, or observing something in and around the space that, okay, that's kind of interesting. So there's a struggle in getting there, being in the studio to allow the creative process to happen. Then I find also where I can get a little bit of pause or block is in that phase of kind of getting source material, and maybe there's no source material that's interesting me. And my way to try and get through that is mark making and work through it. Even taking the most kind of mundane picture or thing that I've seen, let's just try and draw it and see if it is interesting. There's rarely, as I said, a kind of wasted moment when you're actually, physically going through the drawing, the painting process. Something interesting will, I've faith that something interesting will kind of be ignite. But it's the prep work, and maybe, I guess, with like the series Butts and Cracks now, when I never want to feel like I'm repeating myself. So if making a series comes to this point where I feel I'm running closely to repeating what I did in the previous work,
Like almost
but then,
self-derivative.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm kind of coming to a challenge of that at the moment, actually, where these works are very much, they're devoid of perspective because it's looking straight down almost, at your feet and the ground beneath it. And I'm trying to find ways to bring the figure back in. And I've done that in some works where maybe you're staring at off the side of a curb and there could be a puddle there where the road meets the pavement, um, and the figure being brought in through the reflection. But I've done that once, and I'm not sure what is the the next interesting way to take that.
Be a builder's crack is the next one now.
Possibly. So like there is struggles. A few years ago, I was in a different studio space. I was really struggling with work, and they were more. Um, there was no source material for the works. They were quite psychological, kind of expressive pieces. You see some pictures of them on my Instagram of these kind of running figures in these stark red backgrounds, and the figures were um more just, they weren't derived from any person. They were just supposed to be this universal human, and that was really, I don't know. I got in a real funk there where I was battling with these paintings, and so it does have its really challenging times where you have to, if the work isn't, if you don't feel the work is responding, or what it is really is, I'm not responding to the work. So if I'm not responding to the work, putting it out there and anyone viewing it, they won't respond. That can be very challenging at times. Yeah.
And as time is a cruel mistress,
Mm.
I will give two more probing questions. One is, it's a bit of a redundant question because we're here talking about it today, but was there any stage in your journey that, from feedback from friends, family, and or other, that you're like, God, your stuff is shite, or why are you doing this? You're wasting your time. Like, was there ever a point where you maybe nearly put down the brush?
Um, there's definitely been times where I think people look at me maintaining the studio and think, like, and without a show, let's say now there hasn't been a show for 16 months. It's like, what are you doing? These studios,
There
you're
has been a
paying.
pandemic future
Yeah.
audience of 2035.
So
We'll forgive the 12 months at least.
paying, like, studios aren't free. You've got your studio rent, you've got all your materials, and um it's, I have a full storage unit down in Cork, full of art that I'm not sure when it's going to see the light of day again. And the work is only building up behind it to possibly just be nestled in another storage unit next to the one I already have. So I think there are a lot of people who look on it and say, why are you making all this work? But I have never really thought about stopping. I don't think I could. I think it really is just so important for my own head and the way I think through parts of life, the way, it helps me to try and understand what the human experience is. And I hope that doesn't sound too fluffy in any way. And are I hope that there's a genuineness behind that. You hear a lot of people saying, I couldn't stop, and I can't. I mean, I really couldn't see a time when I just wouldn't. And I don't go into the studio every day thinking this is me trying to understand the human experience. But when I look back in the work, I know that that's what it is about. So it's actually just the enjoyment of going in and making work. I couldn't imagine a day when I wouldn't want to go in and paint. I think it's always just such a journey into kind of the unknown. You never know what might happen when you sit down in front of a canvas. There's an excitement to it,
Yeah.
and you know,
Well,
even if they're not for sale, even if they're not hanging on walls, they're sitting in a storage unit. The enjoyment of making them and that journey of making them was worthwhile for me.
yeah, of course. No, well, maybe the ultimate fate, you might have a big bonfire and record that and make it into the end, put it Dante's Inferno for the final piece.
Are
Uh,
you suggesting burning all the work?
well, I think would be quite poetic. Speaking of which, I think it would be worth mentioning that a fine artist is more than just paint on canvas.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be nice to wrap up because you do, or you have had some spoken word pieces as well, and you had a few examples for us today. So I know we're a little bit caught for time now, and I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
keep you too much longer. But if you would be so kind, do you have any of those examples for us, and maybe give us a little quick preamble of where these are coming from?
I do, yeah. So these were very, I guess they still, like, there's a thread that goes through all the work in this kind of exploring the mundane. And even though the output here, as you're about to hear, is very different to the paintings, there are threads and similarities. So this was work that I was creating from the telephone directory. So this nice idea that in theory the telephone directory, the telephone book, you know, contains all of us, all of our names, addresses. It's a book of us, and it's
Yeah.
also this kind of outdated, like, boring book that, you know, an artifact that isn't really used anymore. So I was cutting it up and trying to make with the idea of making maybe paintings, and then was pasting from the telephone directory into the golden pages. And what they actually just became is when I read out what was kind of being cut and pasted, it sounded a lot more interesting than anything that I think I could put down on canvas. So they just became these kind of abstract sound poems. And I see them very much almost a trade back to like abstract expressionism, but more in an audio kind of experience. So these were on show in Amsterdam in 2015 as part of the New Now exhibition for emerging artists. So I can give you a flavour of what one of these poems would sound like if that suits.
Absolutely. Fire away.
Okay. So this is, and there's quite a deep kind of guttural voice that goes along with these works. So hopefully that translates.
Go for it. We
So this
we
is
love it here.
Ovin Joe Gertna Julie Pat Silverheight. Ovin Joe Gertna Julie Pat Silverheight Oaks and Bard Barn and Rockes Joe's Old Duff Reen and Glen Tom Derryberry Tom Height. Jonaline Marie 8 Wood Matthew Martin Kate Blarney Erie Woodvale Furcalo Inishkeen the Ovin Joe Gertna Julie Pat Silverheight. Silver Marie, Tom, Liam Westes, Castleton Bear, Erie, Furhier, Deeds, Martin, Deirdre, One, Ashford Bay, Reen, and Glen, Tom, Derryberry, Tom Height. West Marie, Willow Park, and Sullivan, Ennis Wright, and Leo Tremor, the Grieve, St. Dunmawe, Ovin, Joe, Gertna, Julie, Pat Silverheight. Gorth Row, Neil Death, Weston, Wes, Begging Street, Beogelm, Cloyne, Beach Lee, Mitch Roxby, Glen, Reen, and Glen, Tom, Derryberry, Tom Height. Anvil, Mr. Forest, Dear Eye, The Strand Heights, Crowhab, Beach Me Now, Will You Farn, Tower One Place, Ovin, Joe, Gertna, Julie, Pat Silverheight, Reen, and Glen, Tom, Derryberry, Tom Height. So even though, so that was Ovin, Joe, Gertna, Julie, Pat Silverheight, even though there's no sense there is an underlying kind of structure of poetic form that,
I'll tell you the structure and the form. My interpretation as
yeah,
the live audience here, certainly as a fellow Christian brother, there's definitely a chant aspect to that.
yeah,
Very reminiscent of Latin sort of prayers and chants.
mm,
Maybe even going back to not Gregorian so much, but semi-early Christian-y vibes. I love it. It was very nice to listen to there. It put me in a trance.
thanks, yeah, because it follows the form of a villanelle, so the refraining kind of line, every second verse with a refraining line. And yeah, it was funny that the response to that work was good, and it's because it's cutting up our names, our addresses, so you have kind of Gaelic undertones there as well in just the combinations of letters. So
Super. Well, we'll tie this up in a nice bow now. Billy, thank you very much for joining me today for a much needed episode in the pipeline for the audience there. Billy, where can people find you online to see and maybe hear some more of your works?
yes, you can find me online at billydante.com, and for the most recent updates and the hot off the press work, you can get me at Instagram at billydante.
Super. And as I mentioned, an absolute pleasure catching up with you here today. And I'm sure the audience will get a kick out of this as well. I do encourage you all, I know it's at the end, but definitely check out Billy Dante and his works. It's some superb stuff over there.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks.
Until next time, that has been Richard for the Bazaarcast. Catch us up at the Bazaarcast and make sure to leave a review where you can. See you next time.
End of line.